started.
Yeah, let's start at 7 o'clock.
Yeah, maybe wait. Oh, you going?
Oh, I already said. And then you see that red button? I'll bring you your keys in a second.
Good evening. Can everybody hear me okay in the back? Awesome. And to those tuning in online, the presentation will be linked in the comments. So welcome parents, thank you for coming. I'm J.C. Owens. I'm one of the college and career counselors and director of the counseling department. Kyle Dryculture is also here. He's the other college and career counselor. Before we start, I just kind of like to get a feel for who's in the audience tonight. So if you could please raise your hand if this is your first time attending a senior awards night. All right, that's a lot of you. Very good. How many of you currently have a graduate in college or in the military or working? Okay, very good. How many of you have a senior who knows exactly what they want to do when they graduate? All right, that aligns with what they're telling us. Okay, good. How many of them know that they want to apply to college? Okay, great. Well, whether this is your youngest, oldest, or only child, we want to make sure that we provide information about how we can help, regardless if they know exactly what they want to do when they graduate or if they're still figuring that out. We do have a combined 40 years of experience with college and career advising between Mr. Dryculture, Mrs. Bazelon, and myself, with backgrounds in higher education, financial aid, and college admissions. So we like what we do, we love what we do, and we are excited to help your student and you with the process of searching for a career and applying to college if that is their path. Tonight we're going to be sharing important information that we already shared with them. So a lot of it is going to be when we were with them last week in an English class, the presentation we shared with them, because we know, and I have a freshman myself, that the information doesn't always make it home. So we want to make sure that you have the same information in addition to, as a parent, to support a parent, what you can be assisting with at home and what we assist with on the school front, and how we can all work together to make sure that their college search and application process is as seamless as possible. If you would like to follow along in the presentation, you can get out your phones and point them to either screen to get the QR code. The presentation is also under the school counseling section of the high school website that you can reference as well. Give you guys a few minutes to get that. And again, if you're live streaming, there should be a link to the presentation in the comment section. I'm hoping it works because nobody's telling me it did. Okay, thumbs up. All right, very good. Okay, we switched a few years ago to a college and career counseling model to better serve students, just because over 86% of our students go on to either 2 or 4 year college. So we wanted to make sure that we provide in-depth service in that area. These are the counselors assigned to your student. And I want to pause here for a moment and let you know with a very heavy heart, our colleague and very dear friend, Gina Baislock, lost her husband suddenly just last week. So she is going to be out, and we're just obviously going to give her all the time that she needs. But I want you to know that your student is still in good hands. So while she's out, Mr. Dreikholzer and I will be handling all the college and career counseling, meeting with kids about applications, meetings with you guys and your student, sending transcripts, letters of recommendation, the whole bit. So how we are going to split that is last names A through K. I will be the counselor, the point person, and last names L through Z will be Kyle Dreikholzer. We'll handle, again, throughout the college application process. We have a lot of information to share with your students and you. One of the primary ways we do that is a weekly email that typically comes out on Monday. This past week it was Tuesday because we didn't have school on Monday, but typically on Monday. If you're not getting those, please email one of us so that we can make sure that you start receiving those emails. You'll see as we move along in the year, there's going to be a lot of information about scholarships, colleges visiting, different tips, dates and deadlines, so that's a really important means of communication. We also do have Twitter and a new Instagram page. So one of our new counselors, Mrs. Milano, is overseeing that. We try to communicate with the teacher, or the students rather, the way that they like to receive the communication. So we thought, let's get an Instagram page. I will say though, we told all of your students last week, we asked them how many of you check your email every day, and it would be half or less in every class. So we really tried to hit home that that is how adults communicate. That is how colleges will communicate with you. That is how future employers will communicate with you. So we did tell the students that our primary communication will be those weekly emails and emails directly to them if it pertains to a specific school they're interested in or major. And always, please email us, call us with any questions. We told the students the same thing. If you're working on your common application on a Saturday evening and you're not sure what to put on a particular section, shoot us a quick email with what item you're on, what your question is, and we'll get back to you. We do like to set up a longer, more in-depth one-on-one meeting with all students and parents. So this is a link here you have to schedule an appointment with us. How that will work when you fill out the form, or your child fills out the form, and you might want to ask them if they already did fill out a form, because we've gotten, I think, 75 requests already, and they put, like, if they want to come by themselves or with a parent. So a lot of them right now say just student, which is fine, but I want you guys to know we would love you to come in as well. So check with your student to see if they already scheduled an appointment. If they did and you want to come, please come. And if they didn't, we really want to meet one-on-one so we can understand where your child is in the process and how we can assist. When you fill out the form, you're going to be asked your preference of days and times. I will say the more availability on the front end when you're filling out the form you can give us, the quicker we're going to be able to get you in. Right now, for the next 3 weeks, we are booked solid, so we are scheduling into October. So having said that, again, if your child has, they have an application due and they have a question and they need something quicker than we can get them in, please just have them email us. Yes?
So my son scheduled his appointment, and it might have been with Gina. If it was, would that get switched over to either you or?
That's a great question. So the question is, if your child, or you already scheduled an appointment with Mrs. Baislock, yes, it switched over to Mr. Dreikholzer. We went in and looked at all those and put them on our calendar. And to that point, after you fill out the form, what you will get back is a Google invite with the day and time. And if for whatever reason that doesn't work for you, just send us an email and say, I said I could do Mondays at this time, but that Monday's not going to work, and we will reschedule it. All right, so just a little bit of how we got to tonight and what the students have been working on. Again, just assuming that maybe they don't run home and tell you everything, what we've been doing over the last few years and so far this school year. So you do probably know they've done college entrance practice test every year. The last one was the PSAT last year. We have been in the classroom at least twice a year, every year, doing college and career curriculum, mainly through Naviance. So if you go into your student's Naviance account, either as a parent log in or just have your student log in and show you, you can see under the career tab the assessments they've done. They can redo these. We encourage that, especially the ones that took freshman year, redo those career assessments and inventories to see if things have changed. We encourage students to use the college search and Naviance, so we have been working with them through that. Resume, last year in English class, they should have completed a resume. It's a Google Doc. We asked them to update it when we met with them last week to make sure that's good to go. Taking ACTs and SAT, they all took an SAT last March, but some of them have been on their own, choosing to take these on Saturdays and continuing with that. College exploration and visitation. I know you guys have been getting them on campus because they've been telling us that. That's great. That's something that we want them to continue to do throughout senior year. Specifically, there's a date in October that they should have told you about. I believe it's Thursday, October 12th. That is a PSAT day for the underclassmen. So the seniors are not to be at school, but instead of coming to school, they need to either job shadow or visit a college. That is a Thursday. They do not have school that Friday. It's a teacher work day. So it's a great opportunity, 4 days in a row there, to go see colleges for the first time or perhaps follow-up visits. This year they received a senior packet, which in a minute you're going to have access to as well if they didn't bring that home. We went over the presentation, most of which we're sharing this evening. One thing that many of them have done, but we still have over half that haven't done it actually, is the senior questionnaire. It's just a quick list of questions to help Mr. Dreifelscher and I understand kind of where they are at this moment as far as future thinking, if there's any particular college they're looking at, majors, if they're undecided. That really will help guide that one-on-one meeting and our work prior to the one-on-one meeting with your student. They should hopefully have a list of colleges, if colleges in the cards for them, that align with their academic profile and their interests. If they would like to continue testing, and we're going to talk tonight about ACT and SAT, should they test, should they submit scores and all that. But if they want to continue testing, there is just a couple more days this fall that they can get ahead of those really early deadlines, as November 1st deadlines. The Common App is something that we ask them all to start if they haven't. That is the typical way students apply to college these days. It's widely accepted by most schools. So that is something we're encouraging all students to do, even if they're not sure they want to go to college, just so that they have it ready to go should they choose that path. The college essay they had as their summer English assignment, which you probably know. We told the students just to be patient. The teachers are critiquing them as quickly as they can, but we don't want to rush that process, because a college essay is critically important, especially for a student who is not applying with a test score. So we want to make sure that the teachers take their time and give great feedback. So we ask the students just be patient. They're getting them done as quickly as they can. The autobiographical sketch and resume we'll talk about in a minute. So this QR code links you to the senior packet. This again is available on the website. It had the very first page, I think, is really handy because it has a bunch of upcoming important dates and things for them to just make sure that they're following through on. It includes the application steps, local scholarship application, link to that, and then tips and information they will need in filling out their common application. I'll go back, sorry. So the senior packet, I would definitely, that could be a way in which you could be very supportive, is helping them remember the deadlines and dates that are in that senior packet and the application steps. We'll go over that in a minute, but that is something we told them. You have to refer back to that prior to submitting any application to make sure that you didn't miss any of the important steps. Which, here we go, steps to applying in college. So there are essentially two different ways to apply. You can apply on the college's website, or you can use common application. And the advice we like to give, unless the student is only applying to one college that has their own application, then in that case, they can go through the college's website. That would be fine. For example, the student is going to study flight. They want to go to flight school. They're applying to Bowling Green State University. It is the only school that they are looking at. They have the academic profile to get in there. Bowling Green has their own application. Fine, apply that way. But what the case is for many students, most students, is that they're applying to multiple colleges. If that is the case, the common application is the preferred way to apply, because it is, the bulk of the application is the same for each university. You fill that out and then you just answer supplemental questions and essays for each particular college. So the first step is the student needs to start their application. This is a link that we went over in detail with them that I would encourage you to refer back to for the common application. Tips, common mistakes, regardless if your child hasn't even started a common application or they're near completion and ready to submit, definitely look at this link to make sure that they're following the best practices and the tips straight from the colleges. Information that this is also in the packet, but they need to have this information when they fill out any college application. They're going to be asked the school code. They're going to be asked the class size. Rank is a common question we get. Each student last week did receive a copy of their transcript. And on that, if they were ranked, it would be on their transcript. Essentially, they have to be in the top 10% of their class to be ranked, which I believe is a 4.45 and above. So if they are not in the top 10%, they are to report on any college application, scholarship application, no rank, okay? And trust us, that's going to help them because it is, like I said, they have to have such a high GPA to be ranked, so they would just put no rank, that's not going to be considered. GPA and GPA type, we often see this incorrect when we're reviewing student applications. They will put 5 point for the GPA scale. We are actually a 4-point scale weighted, so they're going to be asked each of those questions separately. We just wanted to make sure they had all our contact information because they do need to put in our phone number and our email so that we can fill out the school report and the counselor rating scales for any Common App school. The second step, yes?
If we had Mrs. Bazelak, should we put her on the Common App or should we put you?
So that's a good question. If Mrs. Bazelak is the assigned counselor, it is okay on the Common App if you guys put her, because we go in and we're still splitting that. And since we just kind of obviously don't know a timetable, go ahead, and we told your student the same thing. They can put Mrs. Bazelak down as their assigned counselor. Just know behind the scenes that we are handling it. Yeah, thank you. So once they've started their application, the next step would be to get into their Naviance account. And this can be confusing for students. So Common App is how they apply. Naviance is how we as a school send the supplemental materials, the transcripts, the letters of recommendation, the Common App school report. So it's the system that we electronically submit their materials on their behalf to the colleges. And it really is a benefit that the district purchase the Naviance because it's the quickest way that materials get to colleges. But the kids sometimes get confused and they think like they're applying on Naviance. No, so they do everything on Common App. What we need them to do is just go into their Naviance account and basically give permission for Common App and Naviance to talk so that we can see in Naviance what colleges they're applying to, what their deadlines are, so that we can do what we need to do on our end. And this, I'm not going to show today, but again, you can go back and watch it. It's a really quick two-minute video on how to match the Common App and Naviance accounts, which has to be done once. A lot of the students I know have already done this, but if they put in a transcript request and we go in and we don't see any colleges in Naviance, we'll just shoot them an email and say, hey, you need to match your accounts, and we'll like reference this video. But just in case they need to watch that to figure out how to match. Yeah.
If you applied unknowingly through the college already, should they still do the Naviance thing to get that information to their college even though it's not through the Common App?
Great question. So student applies not through the Common App, but directly through the college. They still need to go into Naviance and put college I'm applying to and add that college. So they won't do this match process, but they still have to have Naviance and have to go into Naviance to add the college. Oh, yes. So when they add it, it's going to ask, did you apply via Common App or directly to institution? So they would pick directly to institution. We have a lot of checkpoints in place, and you'll see in a minute, like when they request a transcript, they're asked what college and how did you apply directly to institution or Common App. And without fail, we'll have students, and we'll just call them and we fix it real quick. But yeah. The third step is, if needed, secure recommendations. We spent quite a bit of time talking about recommendations. How do you find out if you need them? How do you find out how many? Who do I ask? So we wanted to kind of cover that with you as well. The first thing is the student needs to find out for each of their colleges if they need letters of recommendation. And I'm picking on Bowling Green tonight, but it's the first one that comes to mind. They do not accept letters of recommendation. So if a student goes and asks Mrs. Smith to write a letter of recommendation, Mrs. Smith goes on Naviance to upload it to BGSU, and she'll get a failure message. She can't do it. So that doesn't really make teachers very happy, because they do spend a lot of time writing these letters of recommendation. So the first thing your student will want to do is find out if they need a letter of recommendation. So you could do that a couple of different ways. You can look at each college's website. If you're using Common App, it's really nice. You'll have all the colleges under the College tab. You're going to click on the name of the college. You will see all the different ways to apply, early action, early decision, and the deadlines. You will also see what recommendations are allowed and required. So it'll spell out Case Western University, required council recommendation, required 2 additional teacher recommendations. Bowling Green, none required, none allowed. It'll be very specific on what they need. So the first step is student needs to find out, do I need one? If they need a counselor recommendation, on this, there's a link here that they complete a counselor recommendation form. And that way, we're asking just so we can prioritize our evenings and weekends for the next couple of months. We're asking that the students do that by October 1st. Of course, if they submit one after October 1st, we're still going to do it, because maybe another college comes on the radar that they didn't initially think of that requires a counselor recommendation. So if they need a counselor recommendation, they simply need to fill out the form. Once we do it for one school, it can go to all the schools that accept them, but they need to fill that out initially. If they need teacher recommendation or recommendations, they must first ask in person, which is kind of hard for the students sometimes, especially if they're going back to a teacher they don't currently have. But it's really, really important that they do have that face-to-face interaction, and they ask prior to the teacher getting an email saying that they agree to write one. So they need to ask the teacher face-to-face, and then they need to formally request them in Naviance, which we'll show you in a minute. If the recommender is somebody that does not work in the district, coach, pastor, employer, advisor, and they don't work in the district, K to 12, they will not have a Naviance account. So how the student wants to handle those recommendations, on Common App, there is a place to add other recommender, and they would put the individual's name, title, and email address. That individual would get an email then with instructions on how to upload the letter of rec into Common App. So that's important to know. If the student is allowed only one recommendation, like Ohio State allows one, it should be from the teacher. So that would be the case where you wouldn't want it to be from the boss. But if they're allowed multiple, a second or third can be from one of those outside people that interact with your student. We do ask out of courtesy again that they give 10 days prior to a deadline before they, that they make their request 10 days prior to any deadline. Teachers can say no. Sometimes teachers have to say no. There are certain teachers in the building that get like close to 100 requests, and they just can't do them all. So we told the students, ask now. Make sure you're asking your teachers now. That way they have plenty of time to write it. They're not rushed, and they haven't met kind of the cap that some of them have to set. They also need some information from the student. Obviously, they're going to comment on how they've seen them in class, maybe specific feedback about a project or what have you. But they like to also just kind of incorporate other things, so they want their resume and an autobiographical sketch. So we went over in detail with the students on how to share that, and it's nothing you guys need to worry about, but just so you know, they're asked to provide both to their recommenders, whether it's a counselor or a teacher, so that we can write a robust letter of recommendation. Yes?
What do you recommend if the school does not require a letter, but they are allowed to accept them? Do you recommend that our students?
That's a great question. So a school doesn't require a letter of recommendation but accepts them. A perfect example would be the Ohio State University. They do not require a letter of recommendation, but they accept one. When I met with them last Friday, I asked that very question, and I was told that 95% of the current freshmen on campus provide a letter of recommendation. I mean, it does really help them get a good picture of who the kid is, what's important to them, what sort of attributes they have. So.
One college has told us they use it in merit scholarships.
And if you provide it, they are going to use it for admission certainly, but also possibly for scholarship consideration as well. So the more information you can provide, the better. It's just really those cases of the schools that don't accept them, they really don't accept them. Like, even if you kind of backdoor and email it, they do not read them. So, yeah. The fourth step, and this needs to kind of be the fourth step, we've got to go chronologically here, is to request the transcript. I had a student request a transcript today, and I go into Naviance, the school's not there, I call the kid, and they're like, well, I haven't started applying. I'm like, well, I can't send a transcript because the college is going to get it and be like, who's the student? So requesting the transcript needs to be when the student is really close to submission, okay? And this is just a really quick Google form that goes to Mr. Drypolsher and I. It lets us know, again, where they applied, what their deadline is, and how they applied. Common App directly to the institution. What we then go in and do, and we try to explain this to the students, it's not as simple as like uploading a PDF of their transcript. I wish. But there's counselor questionnaires, there's rating scales, there's a school report, there's a profile we have to attach. So it does take a minute for each student and each college. So again, we're asking, if at all possible, that they try to get the request, if they have a November 1st deadline, that they're not submitting the request to us October 31st. Now, we will get to it, I promise you, but again, we don't want any part of the application and the supplemental materials to be rushed. The fifth step is submitting the test score, and that is not part of their transcript. So if they want their test score sent to a college, they need to request that directly from College Board for ACT, College Board for SAT, and ACT's website for ACT. And we're going to get into that in a minute. I think Mr. Drypolsher is covering that on should they send their test scores or not. This slide is just stating the obvious and what we run into every year. Colleges get thousands and thousands of applications, and it takes a minute for them to log in materials as received. So a lot of times when the student applies, they're going to get like a student portal, access to a student portal where they can check with that particular college the status of their application. And there are some fine institutions, which I will not name, the minute that a student submits an application, an email comes to them, and maybe even you, that says, you're missing materials, we are not going to read your application, we don't have your transcript. It's just an automatic email. So just rest assured, if you get that email, it can panic you as a parent, it can panic your student. What you can do is first step would be to check Naviance. You can see when things have been submitted. The other thing that Mr. Drypolsher and I both do, the minute we send a transcript, we're going to send you an email telling you that we did that. Because when we send it Naviance, we get proof that it went, date stamp, confirmation number, all of that. Just so that you will know it is there. It just takes weeks for colleges to update materials as received. Okay, so just kind of an overview of the timeline, because it is a journey. It's a marathon, not a sprint. It truly is. It starts now, but it goes all the way till National Decision Day, May 1st. So this time of year, this fall, it's really just your your student continuing to work on their application, getting the feedback from their English teacher on their essay, securing those letters of recommendation if they need, if they would like to test again, setting those up. Connecting with colleges, which we'll talk a lot about tonight and how to do that, and then really applying. A good goal for everybody, there are October 15th deadlines, but they're few and far between. A November 1st deadline is a huge deadline for many schools, an early action deadline. So if the students can be done with everything by Halloween, they will be in good shape. It's just kind of a general guideline to hit all those early deadlines. Then December through April, FAFSA used to be October 1st. It is now pushed back to December. They've changed a lot with the FAFSA, so we do have a financial aid night in December. So that's something you cannot and should not do yet because, like I said, it's not open. If you go on to do it, you will be doing the ones for current college freshmen. So hold up, can't do the FAFSA yet. But this time of year is a good time to make sure your student is continuing to apply and look for scholarships. We have some local scholarships we'll talk about, but also other scholarships through colleges, organizations at the local, state, and national level. Sometime during this range, you will be getting back financial aid, well, decision letters and financial aid packages, and sitting around the table as a family deciding by May 1st where your student is going to commit to and deposit. So as I kind of surveyed at the beginning, kids are kind of different spaces as far as what do I want to do with the rest of my life. I feel like a lot of our students say, I want to go to college, but for what? I don't know. We do have Mrs. Borash. She's a fabulous resource if your student is just totally clueless, has no idea kind of what direction. She can work with them one-on-one. She will ask before she meets with them to make sure that they have completed all the assessments and Naviance, so we have some information going into the conversation. But in addition to Mr. Dryholter and I, she's a great resource, like I said, especially for the students that just really aren't sure what career makes sense for them. The college search process, so I know for many of your students that started last year, maybe this summer, it's picking up speed now, hopefully, and what we are telling the students is just trying to figure out what is important to you, and that's hard to do if you haven't been on a college campus. So getting a feel for the college campus is a huge thing, but also, is this college realistic for you and your academic profile? And an easy way to check that is on Naviance. If you put in the name of the college, it'll tell you the current freshmen on their campus, what their average high school GPA was, what their average ACT or SAT score was if they submitted it. So that would give the student a real idea if this is a good, realistic academic choice for them. Continuing to take advantage of career fairs, we have one October 5th at the CVCC. That's a great one. It's very well attended. And I don't know if did anybody go to that last year? Okay, a few of you. So they have them set up, alphabetically. Most of the Ohio public and private schools are there, and also some out-of-state schools. So that's a great opportunity to see a bunch of schools at once. We are very, very fortunate. After COVID, colleges really stopped visiting high schools. They just didn't see value in that. But for whatever reason, well, I know why, because our students are fabulous, thanks to you guys, they still come here. There's like 4 schools in the Northeast Ohio region that they still visit, and we are one of them. So these are college admissions reps, often the same one that's going to be reviewing your student's application for admission, possibly even scholarship, that come right here on campus to meet with juniors and seniors. We have a list of schools that just went out today, actually, that are coming. If your student wants to take the time to meet with this college when they're on campus, they have to go into Naviance and they have to register. It's very simple. They just log in under the college tab, college visits, and they click register. I had a student last year that was applying to a really selective school, and when I looked at the student's academic profile, it was going to be a reach school for this particular student. They met with that rep when they came here, and they were 1 of 2 students that met with that individual, and she fell in love with the student, and she fought for the student throughout the process, and that young man is on campus right now. So I shared that with your students. I mean, it is critically important and a great opportunity. It does vary, you know, when Ohio State rolls into town, it's like a room full of kids, so it's more like of a presentation with a Q&A at the end. Sometimes it's just a one-on-one situation, which can be very intimidating for the student, but we tell them just ask them to tell you about the college. And they usually do have just a presentation already planned, but then opportunity for conversation at the end. So please encourage your student to sign up for these visits. If they happen to have class, typically our teachers are okay with letting them miss class, obviously assuming they're going to make up the work, but they do need to ask permission at least the day prior to the event to make sure that they're permitted to go, and then obviously always have to register. All right, Mr. Drybolt, and we will open it up for questions at the end too, so keep the good questions coming.
My voice doesn't carry, so I apologize. I'm just going to try to adjust this so I don't blow out the speakers. All right, thank you, Mrs. Owens. My name is Kyle Drypolsher. I'm one of the other college and career counselors here at the high school. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the other factors considered the admissions process. So Mrs. Owens kind of touched on the nuts and bolts of the process, all of the application steps and things that are really important for students from a protocol standpoint to follow, and things they need to know. So what I'm going to do is kind of go into some of the more intangible aspects of the process. So see, if you look here, some of these are the factors considered in the admissions process across the country, and this is kind of an extensive list. On the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the main factors that I think most of you are probably already aware of, and your students are probably already aware of. But obviously there are a lot of different things that can go into an admissions process. As colleges will tell you, they're looking at the holistic student. So what that means is it's not just one thing. It's not just GPA. It's not just SAT or ACT scores. It's a combination of things used to try to evaluate the student as a whole. Okay, so when you go to the top factors and then say, okay, well, if you were to rank these factors, what are basically your top three, and then I think three that follow very closely. So the top three are grades, GPA, test scores if required or provided. We'll get to that again in a minute about the test score optional type scenario, and strength of curriculum. So is that academic level classes, honors level classes, AP classes? Have you shown that you're on an upward trajectory as a student, meaning either consistent from freshman to senior year, or perhaps you have steadily improved or you've made vast improvements? All of those things are considered when just looking at a transcript. The next three factors just under that, I would say, are the college essay or college personal statement that your students have been working on, the letters of recommendation from teachers and counselors and maybe outside folks, and extracurricular activities, examples of leadership, and all of those other things that students do, oftentimes outside of this building. So essays. This is a big topic, and our English teachers and English department, I would say in general, are fantastic with helping students with their college essays. So most of this is going to be things that your students have already been told or are working on revising them right now. Essays are difficult because up until now your child has had to follow a specific writing format. You're given an opening paragraph with a thesis statement, you provide evidence for that thesis statement, and then generally you summarize it at the end, and that's kind of the standard writing format for anybody in any type of high school English setting. The college is saying, no parameters, tell us about yourself, and write however you feel is necessary. So when students hear that, it's the first time that they've been told there are no rules. Tell us about yourself. Do it in whatever format, narrative format you choose. I would tell your students the biggest pitfall, I think the mistake that is understandable that students make, is they go, okay, I don't really know where to start. So let's see, I'm in National Honor Society. I play soccer, I play softball, I volunteer at my church, I work at Panera Bread. And they start listing things out. And their essay becomes a narrative form of just telling you as a college rep about things that I can already see on their resume or aspects of the Common App they've already filled out. So good examples for a strong college essay or a writing prompt, I guess I would say, and our English teachers have already been over this with your students, are what is an example of a time where maybe you failed, but you learned from it? Maybe there was an unfortunate event or tragedy or setback in your life that you had to overcome, and how did you learn from it? How did that shape you as an individual? How are you going to use those life lessons to be better moving forward? And tying that into why are you a good candidate to be on our campus in the fall? So those are just things for students to keep in mind. I know it's hard at 16 or 17. I was in that boat also. I remember writing my essay and just looking at it and saying, I'm just really just reiterating things I've already talked about elsewhere in this application. Proofreading, getting your essay reviewed is obviously a huge piece. Spelling, grammatical errors and those types of things are obviously going to set those essays apart. So I would tell students, don't get so involved in this that it's stressing you out to the umpteenth degree, but rather have it peer reviewed, get it done. And my advice to parents too is once we get a final copy, leave it alone, because sometimes we have a tendency to overthink, and students want to take out a sentence or remove a paragraph, and you just start making yourself crazy. So have it proofread, maybe one draft, okay, first, have it looked at, a second draft. I'd say once you get to a third draft, it's probably time to just let it go, okay? Okay, so we're going to hear a lot of these terms, and obviously these are the big admissions terms that students hear about and probably don't necessarily know what they all mean. There's four main admission timelines to look at. So the first one is regular decision. Essentially what this means is if you're looking at a college's application deadline sometime between January 15th and March 1st, normally I would say those deadlines, Mrs. Owens, are on the 15th and 1st, right? So it's 15th, 1st, 15th, 1st. What that normally means is if students apply by a regular admission deadline, they should have a decision by April 1st of this year. And I would say for students, if you think about it, your tuition deposit for pretty much any college in this country is May 1st. So if you have just a month to make a decision on a school, you're hearing from a school, it's probably better to hear a little bit earlier than that, okay? But that's what regular decision is based on. It's based on the college's regular deadlines. Early decision is, we have here, it's an ethical agreement signed by a parent, counselor, or teacher that's involved in the process. I maybe have one or two students each year who apply to a college early decision, and here are the guideposts I would provide to you. If you or your student is saying, am I an early decision candidate? Normally it is someone who comes to me and says, my great-grandfather went to this school, my grandfather went to this school, my aunts and uncles went to this school, my parents have gone to this school, and that's where I'm going to go. It's the only school I want to go to. If I apply and I'm accepted, that is it, and the college process for me is finished. Okay, you probably fall in the early decision category. For most students, 95, 98% of the students here are weighing options. It might be between 2, 3, or 4 schools, once we get down the wire. My advice about early decision is if your student or son or daughter is thinking about that, talk with us as counselors and we can kind of advise you on the process and make sure you understand what goes into it and if maybe it is a good idea for you, because it is very much a case-by-case basis. Early action. Early action is what you'll hear a lot because schools like The Ohio State University, University of Miami, Ohio, University of Cincinnati, University of Dayton, Ohio University, a lot of our public institutions in the state of Ohio do have early action deadlines. And an early action deadline is pretty simple to understand. It basically means if you apply by their set early date, it could be Ohio State or Miami, November 1st, November 15th, I believe, for OU, December 1st, traditionally for University of Cincinnati. And I would have your students check the websites. During COVID, those got shifted around a little bit. But if you apply by that date, there's nothing special you have to do. The college is saying if we receive your complete application by this date, you should have an admissions decision, I would say, generally sometime shortly after the holiday season. So you're talking early January. I do know, Mrs. Owens, you were at the Ohio State. We divide up the college information sessions. I think they have 2 release dates. And this is how this affects students. So if you have a student applying specifically the Ohio State University, whether you hear at the first date or you hear at the second date, and I think they're about 4 weeks apart, it has no bearing on your admission status. It's just they do it in 2 groups. So what happens for your lot as parents is that someone hears that their friend got an acceptance letter and they didn't get anything. And those kids come sprinting down to our offices in a panic because they're like, how come I didn't get an email? They got an email. I didn't get an email. They have 2 release dates, and it doesn't mean anything in terms of your admission chances. So I would just keep that in mind and pay attention. On Ohio State's website is pretty informative, so just make sure you read and understand exactly what those dates are for any school. The last one is rolling admission. Rolling admission is the college doesn't have a specific application deadline. As soon as they have a complete application from a student, they will get a decision or try to get a decision out in 4 to 6 weeks. So in essence, they just roll, if that makes sense. 4 to 6 weeks is a pretty good amount of time. I would say for the schools that have rolling admission, such as University of Akron, Kent State University, or Cleveland State University, just to give you a few examples, locally in the area, sometimes I've heard students are getting decision letters in as quickly as a week or 2. Okay, entrance exams, SAT, ACT. So this is the analogy I've always used for these, and I do get questions from parents about, okay, which one is better? Which one, should my student send? SAT, ACT. They're Pepsi and Coke, okay? They're both the same thing. It's a college entrance exam. In my years, both as an assistant admissions director and transitioning into the other side here at the high school level, I have never run into a university who will publicly say, I prefer the SAT or ACT, okay? These are the websites, so if you are interested, I know for many of you, your seniors are probably at the tail end of the testing cycle, meaning that they're probably taking, if they are taking a fall test, pretty soon. The SAT, ACT, again, the question I often get is, well, what score should I send? Princeton Review online, if you're wondering, I have an SAT score and I have an ACT score. An SAT score is out of 1,600 with 1,800 point parts, and then the ACT has 4 parts out of a score of 36. You'll say, okay, well that's apples to oranges. I can't do this. Well, Princeton Review has a website. You just plug in. You can do SAT to ACT or ACT to SAT, so you can determine really what is your highest composite score. And if you have questions about which score to send, or you want to get kind of into the nitty-gritty of, okay, well, what if I have a higher subsection on a science section or a math section? Those are things I think that's why we talk about these individual meetings to advise you, as an individual. Okay, so again, obviously I would say if you do have a student taking a test this fall, you're probably aware of these dates for the testing. A question we do get is, okay, if I'm applying, let's use the Ohio State University as an example, and I want to apply by that November 1st early action deadline. If I take an October, SAT or ACT, will I get my scores back in time to send? And the question, and my answer to that is, it depends. It can be, if you get your scores back electronically, it can be somewhat of a quick turnaround time, but again, I would say if you're trying to meet a November deadline and you have these fall testing dates that you're trying to use, it really depends, I would say. So, but if you absolutely feel like you need to take that test and you're willing to, I don't want to say necessarily roll the dice, but I'm hoping I'm going to get this back in time, I would certainly encourage you to do that, and I tell families often, especially with fall testing for any seniors, it's your decision. If your students took the spring test or took a test over the summer, if they're happy, they have what they need, or they feel like this is my best test, I'm not going to take it anymore, that's a family decision. And if you have questions about that afterwards, myself and Mrs. Owens, happy to speak with you individually. Okay, so test optional. I think this is both a blessing and a burden in many ways, and not to talk about it into such great length, but during COVID, colleges and universities obviously felt the sting of students who were applying but either could not take a test because testing dates were canceled. Testing sites that normally would offer tests to 150 students were saying that for safety, for social distancing, they can now only give them to 25 or 50, and as a result, a lot of students were closed out of testing opportunities. Further reaching, and especially for some of your students who are probably, even in middle school or even too young to take tests, there was the hybrid learning models or some students going online. Essentially, I think what colleges are saying is there is a group of students out there for a couple years here that have been shortchanged in one way or another. So because of that, we are going to continue, as of now, many schools are saying they're continuing to be test optional. So meaning, if you do not submit an SAT or ACT score, that's your choice. And what they have told us and what they reiterate is they're simply taking that aspect of the evaluation out of the admissions equation, and you're relying on the strength of your other materials. I would check with your schools about the testing policy, and I would say why this is kind of a catch-22, especially for parents. Sometimes even back, before this testing optional kind of phase here, students had to send a test score. So even if it was maybe a little low, you sent it. It really wasn't a decision. Oftentimes the questions we get now, and what students struggle with, is if I'm right on the cuff, and Mrs. Owens said you look at a college's, their statistics on test scores and GPA are based on last year's incoming freshman class. And if you look at that SAT, ACT scores and you go, I'm very close, I'm a little bit below, do I send it? Am I close enough? Is my GPA and my other materials strong enough that I don't need it? And sometimes those decisions are often much more difficult than it was to just say, okay, I have no choice. I'm going to send my test score, it's a little low, and I'm hoping, for the best. I would check with your schools about their testing policy. Generally, when we speak with colleges, what they will tell us and what they will communicate to families is, a good rule is if you are in the middle 50% and around their average test score, okay, for SAT or ACT, that it's probably wise to send it, or if you're significantly above. If you're a little bit below, or if I'm getting scientific, maybe more than one or standard deviation below their mean, or a little bit more, not to get too technical, it might be a wise decision to not send the test scores. Check with your schools. If you have younger children, I don't know, and Mrs. Owens and I are going year to year as how long this will last and what schools are going to continue to be test optional. And this is when those individual meetings, and if you can't meet with us as parents or emailing, calling, feel free to reach out to us. And sometimes the advisement is just so case by case and individual. Okay, I don't want to really get into all the live links here, but if students are taking a test this fall, there's some amazing free test prep options out there. Khan Academy and Princeton Review, I would say, are probably two of the most prominent that students can use to prepare for standardized testing. Okay, sending test scores. Mrs. Owens talked about this, but we do reiterate this because oftentimes this is something that gets lost in translation with students. Students do send their own test scores from those testing companies. So it's the College Board for the SAT, and it is the ACT for ACT. I do prefer their name because it actually makes a little more sense. But sometimes students forget about this fact and they assume that their test scores are on their transcript or somehow included in their other information. And if you're sending test scores, why this can be so important is if you don't send a test score by the date of a college's application deadline, if it's optional, they're just going to not use them, okay? Or if they're required, then your application will be incomplete and you will have passed that deadline. So just make sure if you're going to send a test score, you have to go into their student account in College Board or an ACT. And I always tell parents the fail-safe of how you'll know if you did is because they're going to ask for $12 or $13 every time you send it. And that's how you'll know you've done it, and then they'll send you a confirmation email. Okay, financing. I don't want to go into this, as we could talk about the financial aid aspect of the college process all day. And we do have our financial aid night on December 18th. We'll talk a little bit about that in a bit here. So I would encourage all of you and students and anybody to attend. But financing college is bits and parts. And basically what we're kind of laying out here is it's normally a combination of things such as scholarships. We offer scholarships through the community and through the school district. So our local scholarship application is due by January 26th. So this is a live link. Again, for you parents, we will send this out electronically. So you will have this, to be able to look at all this and earmark when those deadlines are. Fastweb.com is a free scholarship matching service or database. It's like any type of search engine or search account. You create an account and you can put in search parameters based on geographic location, major, a lot of different things to help you narrow down maybe some scholarships or things that are pertaining or of interest to you. Grants and loans, and this is more for the students because financially, if I was in high school, a lot of this really didn't hit home until later. For many students, obviously college, paying for it after the admission piece, which is separate completely from the financial aid piece, it's how do I do this and how do I pay for it? A lot of it's going to be normally a combination of family contribution or parent contribution. Grants and scholarships, which I tell the students obviously is money given to you that you don't have to pay back. And then, the reality for many students is the student loans where students are borrowing money. And we, on the December 18th date, will have folks talk about all of the, whether private loans, government loans, subsidized, unsubsidized loans, Pell Grants, Parent Plus loans, all of that information that you've probably heard about, or as parents on the financial side you want to know more about. I would say come to that December meeting because we will really get into the weeds on all of the stuff that you want to know. Okay, again, December 18th is our financial aid night at 7 p.m. We will have folks on hand who work in the Kent State University financial aid office department. I actually believe we will have their director here, possibly. So we have a lot of financial aid experience at that meeting, and feel free to pick their brain, talk to them afterwards, because I know that's a huge piece of the process, especially for you as the parents, guardians, and folks at home. Okay, so some pointers for both students and parents. The students, and we talked about this with them last week when we were in the classrooms, is really take charge of this application process. Parents, counselors, we're all here to help and we're all here to be involved. The students are the ones ultimately who are going to step foot on that campus in the fall. It has to be them who make the decision about a place that you hope you're going to be for 4 years. So students should really take charge of it and be involved in every aspect, not have mom or dad or somebody else kind of doing it for them, because at the end of the day, it will not really pay off if they're ending up somewhere that they had no hand in choosing. Staying organized, the forms, deadlines, and requirements. Mrs. Owens hit this on the head. We have a lot of checks in place and we will follow up with students. We've gotten very good at reminding them, knowing they're high school students, about deadlines, about staying organized, about doing things in advance, about helping them when they don't do things in advance. But as parents, it is great to keep those lines of communication open, feeding into this next part here about, okay, where are we at? What are your deadlines? What have you done? What is left to do? Helping your students develop a checklist, I would say, is probably a huge, important part. But have them, again, communicate with us and take charge of that. Focusing on fit is a very important piece of it. After you get past a lot of the other aspects of the college process, where do I fall academically? How do I match up? With some of those guidelines, it's what is a good fit? What fits your personality? What fits you as a person? Do I want a big school in an urban setting? Do I want a smaller school in a suburban setting or quieter setting? Do I want a school that has a lot of athletics or different activities? Do I want a quiet school that really has my 24 person in a classroom setting as opposed to being in a lecture hall with 150 students? Those are all good questions for your son or daughter to start asking themselves. It really does nobody any good for a student to know that, okay, I really want a small school and a school that really caters maybe more to individual needs. And I feel like I have this conversation with a student every year where that's pretty much, what they lay out is what they're looking for. And then ultimately we come to find out they're at, a larger school like Ohio State or Miami. And I go, this is really not what you were talking about in the fall. And we hope those kids are successful, but success is really the biggest indicator is fit. Don't panic, we're here to help you. Mrs. Owens already mentioned when students get those automatically generated emails about missing materials. I often know times that students are talking to friends who maybe have a different timeline than them. Maybe they're applying somewhere that has supplemental essays involved, and the colleges they're looking at don't. And it is very easy for especially the mind of a high school senior to think that I'm not doing enough. I'm not where my other friends are, and it becomes a comparison game. Don't panic, we're here to help you. If students have questions, we tell them, please come down, make an appointment. We will get you through this. Okay, so policing yourself. And I can think probably all of you in this room and myself and Mrs. Owens, in many ways, we didn't have social media when we were younger. I think oftentimes it was maybe a simpler and better time when every aspect of life wasn't, you didn't have the ability to put things out online or publish things. Students have grown up in this. We have students now who are seniors in high school who have really probably been exposed to social media for the majority of their lives, or at least from an age when, they were very young and impressionable. Students, in terms of what they put out there, I know if I was 15 years old, I'm glad I didn't have this, because some of the things you might write or do or put videos of is not something that the 25-year-old you would be very happy with, right? So what I tell students now, the reality is college admissions folks do pay attention to this, okay? Especially if students are in line for scholarships or honors dorms or anything you can think of. And Mrs. Owens and I both, sadly, have had students who've lost admission opportunities, lost scholarship opportunities, athletic or otherwise, and just basically had to be called into question their character. And oftentimes for something that was, does that represent them as a whole individual? No, but it could be a silly post or a comment or a photo or something out there that's, I think, not appealing to someone who's trying to judge your character. So I challenge students now, and I told them this last week, I say go into all of your accounts. I try to include all the icons for the ones I could think of. I don't think any of them use Facebook anymore, and I guess Twitter is now called X, as I was told, so I'll have to change that logo soon. But go on there, and the rule of thumb I tell students is if you log into your account and there's a video that you don't want your grandma to see, or you don't want your pastor to see, or you don't want your friends' parents to see, or something along those lines, take the time to clean up those social media accounts now, and it will really pay dividends for them later. Recommendations from students: keep your grades up through the entire year. Students got a copy of their transcript last week that have their grades up through the end of junior year. And what we were telling students is that's the transcript that colleges will see. So the GPA that you earned as of June of 2023 is what colleges are going to look at in this admissions process. What that doesn't mean is what you do this year doesn't matter, or that colleges are not going to ask for updated grades. Especially if students find themselves in a situation where they're maybe on the bubble admission-wise for a college. Maybe their GPA is just a little bit below. And I can say this sitting on the other side of the fence in the assistant admissions director chair. I read applications all day, and there was nothing that was more disappointing than a student who had very strong, consistent grades freshman, sophomore, junior year, but was maybe on the bubble of what we were looking at, and I would ask for an updated transcript in January of their senior year, see how they're doing, and then see that it fell off. Because oftentimes students talk to each other and say, those grades don't matter. It's senior year. I want to have fun. We have formal dances. I'm starting on the soccer team. I have other things I want to do. So if I can get a B when really I probably could have gotten an A, that's fine. I'm going to mail it in on this test, and if I get a C here or there, okay, it's my senior year. Don't fall into that trap, because oftentimes what students find is when it's January and they're asked to send some of these updated transcripts for some schools, you want to still continue to put your best foot forward. So take strong competitive classes. Mrs. Owens and I are pretty candid with juniors when we go through the scheduling process last year about, are you challenging yourself? Are you taking that senior level science class that maybe you don't need but you should take? I know having 3 or 4 study halls sounds great, but are there classes you can take that will help you down the road? This is a marathon, not a sprint in some things. Acceptance is contingent upon all years of high school. So I tell students oftentimes, even if maybe your freshman year especially is where students might say, I was somewhat immature, I did not have my best showing, but I got better along the way. Are you showing that you're consistent? Are you showing, as I said at the beginning, kind of an upward trending or upward trajectory of grades? Those are all important things from an admissions standpoint that they're going to be looking at, more so than just flat grades or classes. Are you showing consistency and improvement? Are you somebody, when you come on campus, I think has the academic maturity and personal insight to be successful? Okay, so pointers for you as parents. Again, we said let your student take control of the application process. Absolutely, as parents, offer support. I know for some parents, and even with my own 6-year-old daughter, although it's early yet, I probably have to peek over her shoulder from time to time because I'm not exactly sure if she's always going to be doing what we expect her to do. But let them take control of it and get in the habit, as they will in a short time, really be in control of everything. So make sure they're filling out the applications, they're working on the essays, they're asking the questions on these college visits. Okay? Those are all good things for them to do. Reassure them that you'll be proud regardless of their decisions. I know it sometimes for many students, it is hard enough if you get a denial letter, because for some students this might be the first time ever really that they've ever been told in their mind, you're not quite good enough, you didn't quite make it, and it can be very demoralizing. In some students, especially if they had their heart set on a school or were just really confident that they were going to be getting somewhere, and for whatever reason they don't. As parents, it is really important to reassure them, help pick them up. Everybody finds their fit, and I always tell students, you will end up where you're meant to be, whether it's this pathway you thought it was going to be or not. Using the resources, so our counseling website, Mrs. Owens talked about Naviance, the senior packet is really the Bible of the senior year that I would say refer back to. Your students have a hard copy, but obviously we'll share this out, the electronic copy. Just keeping it up on those deadlines and those application steps, because I know even though it's 5 steps, there's a lot going on. Students sometimes forget things along the way. There is a school out there for everyone. Help your student find the right fit. Fit, again, I can't stress enough, is the biggest indicator, I think, of college success. It really sometimes isn't about whether a student is academically, even a school maybe they're a little bit above, or they go there just for athletics, or there's a lot of reasons that maybe folks might pick a school that aren't really based on what's good for them. It's just the reality of it. But finding fit and saying, are you going to be happy here? Does this have a program you're interested in? Do you see yourself being here? And the biggest example I'll give you as parents is I have a student who will give me a bunch of schools, and they might say, okay, I'm looking at University of Kentucky, University of Minnesota. And I'll say, okay, how far away from home do you want to be? And they'll say, oh, about 2 hours. And I'll say, okay, well, geographically, unless I've lost my mind, none of these schools are a very good fit for you. Or I had a student actually last year who said, I want to major in marine biology. I said, okay. So in my head, I'm saying, well, what schools are you looking at? Because as most of us would believe, marine biology would probably be a coastal school somewhere. And that student told me, maybe Ohio State, Bowling Green, or Cleveland State. And I said, well, Lake Erie does have a lot of fine aquatic life, but realistically speaking, those aren't going to be a good fit for you depending on what you want to do. So a couple little comic relief examples, but fit is that important for students, so help your student find that perfect fit. FAQs, if I apply online, am I done? And we're kind of hammering this home, I know, Mrs. Owens, but it is that important, and I know folks have places to be, so I'll keep it going. No, so in addition to the online, as we talked about, you need to request the transcript via Naviance and also submit that transcript request Google form. Request teachers' recommendations in Naviance, and go online to have your test scores sent should you need to or should you want to. If I apply online and then I receive an email from the admissions office that they did not receive my transcript and other materials from the counseling office, what happens? Should I panic? No. Online submissions need to be caught up with what is sent from the counseling office. Check your account to confirm your status from the high school, and check college websites. I will touch on this a little bit because working in an admissions office, you might think that this is so technologically based on only computers. Many colleges still have physical people sitting at computers who process and log information as it comes in. So even if you're maybe a smaller school, but you have 5,000 transcripts that come in, they have Bob Jones and Cheryl Jones here typing it in, trying to get that stuff logged in. It can take a couple weeks for everything to be to be registered and marked as complete. So just keep that in mind to kind of understand why it might take a while and why don't panic. Check your college websites to monitor your status. That's oftentimes the most up-to-date way, and I would tell students if you have really you're just a little bit anxious and for peace of mind, I would call their office directly. And oftentimes, for example, when I was on the admissions side, if someone called me, I'd physically walk across the hall, and I would talk to Cheryl Jones, who was a real person. I didn't make that up. And I would say, okay, can you show me this transcript? You should have a pile, and she'd go, yes, it's here. So they should be able to help you out in real time to help you sleep a little bit better that night. Should I wait until I take the ACT or SAT to submit my applications to colleges? Send your applications as soon as possible and first, and then you want to have your test scores sent directly from the testing agency. Admissions and scholarship deadlines will not allow for late scores. The application is the piece that they tie everything else to. So for example, if a college only gets a transcript and a student hasn't applied, they don't know you. They don't care because the transcript needs to be matched to someone who has an address, has all the other information. So until they have that application, everything just kind of floats in cyberspace, okay? It's not the end of the world if something doesn't get there first, maybe the test score or something gets there before an application, because I don't want to have students panic, but it takes a while for them to match it up. So when the application comes first, it always makes it much easier for their admissions processing division to match it all together. What is the advantage of the early application or completing applications early? You'll be notified sooner of a decision. We talked about that. And colleges will say that there are more scholarship or financial aid award opportunities if you apply by an earlier deadline. Does that mean if you apply in a regular admission deadline, there's no chance at scholarships? No. But many times that if you're really looking at those scholarships, or that's important to you, which for many students it is, and a school has an early action deadline, it probably is in your best interest to send your materials in by that date. Do grades really count senior year? Don't high school grades just show up through grades 9 and 11? Transcripts only reflect the grades from 9th to 11th grade, but your senior year does matter, as we just talked about. Colleges, many of them, especially the selective schools, will expect to see a 7th semester transcript, and then the final transcript, which we send out after graduation. Admission status can be revoked if your transcript shows a decline in performance. Again, this is not something we want to see. Thankfully, it's not something we see often, but students really need to be aware of the fact that, again, if you find yourself or your student not having a good senior year for one reason or another, it can be problematic. Do your recommendation letters have to be from teachers? They do not. That said, the recommender should be someone who knows you well. It could be a teacher, administrator, coach, maybe an advisor, employer, or a youth leader. Be sure to follow the instructions for that application, as Mrs. Owens talked about. If it's somebody who does not work in the high school, they will not be able to send the letter through Naviance and would have to use typically the Common App recommender feature or emailing it directly to the admissions office. Can you recommend any resources or books that would be helpful in this process? We sure can. Us as resources, myself and Mrs. Owens, our English teachers, although they teach English and are great with the essay, they are very familiar with the process because we work with them on these college application presentations every year. Naviance is an excellent resource. As Mrs. Owens said, it's a communication, it's a transference tool for us for the process, but it's also good for finding information on colleges and statistics and things that you had to, in a time, go and find a book at a library to look through. Rep visits, again, we are very fortunate to have reps who still choose to come here. I know as a college rep, I enjoyed the visits, and I think for many schools, the reality of the overhead costs of car and gas and hotels has become a bit much, and they have dialed it back, but these folks do make time for us, which I think speaks a lot to you as parents and the quality of our students. And this is the last thing I will leave you with. Again, college is not a prize to be won, but rather a match to be found. So work with your students. We're very excited to be here with all of you. And I think this is going to be an excellent year. So I will end it on that. And then if we have individual questions or
We can stay up here for individual questions. If there's any group questions, you can ask them now.